Today we're going to be tying Lefty's Deceiver. This particular minnow pattern is quite effective for both freshwater and saltwater species and is one of my personal favorites for targeting smallmouth bass. For this, we're going to be using a Gamakatsu size 4 B10s hook. We're actually going to be tying a slightly smaller Deceiver today. Typically these are tied a little bit larger, but I find smaller sizes tend to be pretty effective. So feel free to experiment with hook size. We're also going to be using kind of an orange colors today. So we've got this nice kind of orange grizzly saddle hackle. We're going to have some bucktail. So this bucktail, again, we're going to have two different colors, regular traditional kind of orange, and then like a root beer color we'll have as well for on top. We're going to have two different colors of flash. We're going to have Krinkle flash, and then we're going to use this darker flash in place of the traditional peacock curl. We also, for our thread, we've got this burnt orange 210. Again, I want to use a more, strong thread like a 210 or, something. Sometimes people use gel spun. Another one is G. Something within that line that would be a lot stronger that we can put tension on, because that's going to be important. Just for durability, we've got head cement. And then also, I like to weight my deceivers, so I've got a little bit of lead-free wire. This is 0.025. But again, depending on the size of the fly and personal preference, you go larger or smaller. Okay, so for this fly, we're going to start by tying in the back. So I'm going to go ahead and lay down a thread base all the way down the hook. So just start wrapping my thread down. I like to stop about halfway, trim off my excess, and then continue to come down the hook shank. Now, where we're going to start tying is about even with the hook point. So you can see we have my hook point here. We're going to stop right about there, and that's where we want to start tying in. So I put in about 1-2 wraps below and then come back, just so I've got a little bit of material behind. That's just the way that I like to tie it. So to do this, we're going to go ahead and we're going to start with our orange bucktail. Just so you know, from a color choice, what I tend to do is, with almost all of my minnow patterns, I do whatever's going to be the bottom of my fly. Now this is going to be oriented the same with the hook point. So the bottom of the fly will be down here. So I like to do light colors, and then above I like to do dark colors. And traditionally that's what we find in nature with minnows and with the camouflage, is dark on top, light below. And that has to do with birds looking down. So in my tail section, I'm going to choose the lighter color for this part. So if I was doing a more traditional chartreuse over white, I'd be doing white here instead of the chartreuse. So almost as always, whenever we're working with bucktail, we want to take less than what we think we may need. Especially with this being a smaller hook, we really don't want to put a lot in the back section. So I'm thinking, about something like that will be good. So take my bucktail, trim close to the hide, set that aside for the moment, and as always, pinch about halfway down, and we pull out some of these bits. Now this orange bucktail, even though it's all small and narrow, is actually pretty decent because most of the fibers are the same length. I don't have a lot of small bits. So, I always try to find bucktails like that. But there is some variability in the tip length. So I'm actually going to grab close to the end, pull out, and restack by hand. And what that does is make more of my bucktail fibers about the same length. It gives me kind of a nice taper in the end. Because this is a smaller fly, I'm not actually going to be using the entire length. I'm actually going to be using quite a small bit. So I want to make sure that I still have volume. So I'm going to do it again. Take out these longest fibers, lay them back in, and that results in kind of a nice thicker body, but still with a more natural taper. Alright, so for the Deceiver, we are going to measure out, so about one, more or less 2 lengths, and make sure our overall profile looks pretty good. Then we grab it with our left hand. So now I'll go ahead and I'll trim. And again, I'm doing a straight cut on these. Some people like to do a bit of an angle anytime they're working with bucktail. I like a straight. One of the main concerns with the Deceivers you'll see is a buildup of material in the back, and you'll get a large bump of material. I'm going to show you how to avoid that. The number one way to avoid that is less material. Not using a ton of material will help make that bump less. So I went ahead and I put one wrap in, and if you notice, I didn't pull down. I went over relatively loose, and then come up and pull up slightly. Now I'm going to come down. Now I haven't cinched real hard, and the reason is I'm going to take this and push it around the hook. And so what we end up getting is where now there's more material kind of all the way around this hook shank. That also reduces our material bump. So now I'm only going to put in enough wraps to secure this material. And that's it. Because as we put material in the back, we're going to continue to put down thread, and that will fully lock in this. I just want to make sure it's not going to move. Okay, so the next material I'm going to put in is my crystal flash. So my crystal flash is a little bit gnarly. I got a little bit scraggly pieces, but all in all, it will get the job done. So I'll pull out, let's do 3 pieces. That's a number I happen to like. Gather my material together and make sure that when I fold it in half, it's going to be long enough. And it is. It'll be just long enough. It's one of the reasons why I like this crystal flash. Is it's perfect to fold over for these smaller deceivers. So I wrap around my thread, bring my thread up, let the bobbin come down, and that will perfectly place it, and with just 2 wraps it's locked into place and isn't going to easily pull out. So I'm going to utilize my spring and kind of sit that back so it's sitting there. And now I'm ready for the part that a lot of people find tricky about the Deceiver, and that's actually in our hackle. So I'm going to go ahead and pull off 2 pieces, and I'm going to do one side, and then I'm going to do the other side. So some people will actually take, I've got another 2 pieces over here, they'll actually stack all of them together and stick it down and try to tie it in at once. I find it's a lot easier to control if I do this one side at a time. Rotary vise also really helps with this pattern, but I've tied it without a rotary vise and it works just fine. So what I'm going to do is try to align these tips as best I can. And this doesn't have to be perfect, by the way. If your fly looks a little gnarly at the end, it'll just fish better, right? It'll look more wounded. So some people get really worried about this has to be perfect and it has to look symmetrical and it has to this and that. Well, if it's too good, it actually won't wiggle as much in the water. If it's a little bit asymmetrical, if it's a little bit crazy, it'll actually fish wounded and you'll catch more fish. So, don't worry about making this look like something that you can put on the mantelpiece on your wall. Alright, so now we got to find our length. And what I'm trying to do is match the length of my bucktail, just slightly. I like to be a little longer, but not much. Very, very close. And so once I have that length, I'm going to pinch behind where I want to tie, and I'm going to cut off a section in front. So now I have this kind of bit right here, and this becomes important. So there's a little bit of fibers that were cut, that were trapped in my fingers, and now I'm going to start stripping these fibers back. Because what I don't want to do is tie it on right away. Because if you tie it on with these fibers down, you know, you'll get some short strikes and it'll actually rip the feathers out. So what we want to do is make an anchor. When you do that, we're going to do this comb. And I'm going to cut it up here. Usually I'm cutting real close to me, but I want you to be able to see. So I'm going to go right above the and below the stem of the feather. And that creates, hopefully you can see it, that creates this little comb. And it's on that comb that we're going to secure in these feathers. So I'm just going to kind of hold it here, lay it down, and start putting my thread around. Now I don't have to put these in super crazy tight. I'm going to do a little bit of pressure up front. But because I have those barbs, these feathers are going to hold in place. And so that's one side. See, that's relatively flat. They will kink a little bit, especially depending on the type of stem you have and if, you know, where you're tying along it. I mean, you can fiddle with these for hours if you want, trying to make them perfectly straight, but honestly the fish don't care. So now I've tied the front, I'm going to tie in the side. And I'm going to use my rotor to just turn it so again you can see what I'm doing, so you're not blocked by the hook. But if you don't have a rotary, as you saw I did this one vertical, it ties in just fine. So I want to make sure I get these really close to the same length. Again, I don't have to be perfect as my other feathers. So I'm going to hold it. I'll actually cut this one down here. And I'm going to do the same thing I did before. So I'm kind of bringing out these fibers, making them a little gnarly. And I'm going to trim just above the barb, not flat against it, the stem, a little bit below it. And what that results in is, again, this kind of spiky comb. And so now I'm going to take the feathers. Some people want to know, okay, do you put the color out? Do you put the dull side out? I do the dull side just because I think it lays better and locks in better. But obviously you lose a little bit of color vibrancy. I don't think it matters that much. But just as before, I'm not putting in a ton of pressure when I first put it in. And when I get to the front, that's where I'm laying down a little bit more pressure. And I'm going to come to the back and just make sure it's on there, but again, not tighten it too hard. So you can see these got a little bit kinked on me, kicking out a little bit to the side. Not super concerned about that. I can put another wrap behind while holding it flat, see if it helps a little. But the reality is that this is going to fish just fine. So like I said, this is one of those patterns people get a little bit too crazy with, trying to make sure everything is absolutely perfect. And in the end, the fish, they don't really care. So now, remember I talked about how we had the material bump? As you can see, we did a pretty good job. We minimized it. It's not huge. I mean, you know, sometimes it'll be way up high, you know, especially if you're trying to put in tons of material and you're putting in tons of wraps with each material laid down. But we did a pretty good job. We kept it relatively low. So the next part that I want to do to further bring this taper down up along the hook is I'm going to use my lead-free wire. So I'm just going to pick out a length. You know, usually I do it while it's still on the bobbin, but we'll do it like this just so you can see it. So I just have some small length, and I'm just going to lay it back up onto that bump, and then just wrap in a couple wraps, and then kind of holding that there. And it's going to move on you a little bit. That's alright. You can put in your turns. And there's 5 turns. We'll do 6 turns. I like a little bit of weight, otherwise the fly ends up staying on the surface. So a little bit of weight just helps that initial getting it down. And once the fly gets saturated, it'll sink. But I really want to make sure I don't crowd this section, because I'm going to be tying in more bucktail up here. So I want to make sure that section's free. So this is pretty good. I'm going to helicopter it off. Some people don't like helicoptering. I don't think it's that big of a deal for this pattern. If you get a little piece that's a little bit long, you can either try to break it again or wrap it around. And I got this bit back here. So what I'm going to do is fold it back forward and then fold it around. Now the result of this stuff is now I've got these little sharp bits, and that's one of the reasons why people don't like doing that helicopter or spinning method. But if you just use Hackle pliers, or these are barb crushing pliers, and you actually just put it on and just press it down, what you end up doing is taking that little bit that's sticking out and folding it right onto the hook shank. So now there's nothing there to catch on anything. It's not going to threaten my thread at all. And so I can lock it in and not have to worry about it. I'm also going to take my wraps, a couple of them. See that? How I did these long diagonals? What that does is prevent the thread from digging in between these wraps. And that's good too, because then it stays put, it doesn't start getting a little bit gnarly and separating out on you. And that's it. So now I kind of have the entire hook shank with this relative same diameter, which is nice. I don't have to worry about material suddenly pushing out. And I'm going to flare the top and front anyway, so it puts me right where I want to be to tie in. So that's how I do the back tail section. As with anything with fly tying, you know, experiment, find what you like to do. Make it your own. Alright, so now we're up onto the front of the fly. We're going to go back to our light color, because we're going to tie in the bottom first, and then we're going to tie in the sides, and then we're going to tie in the top. So we're going to do this in 4 sections. So this is going to be really similar to what we've already done. We're going to take our bucktail. We're going to take a section of it. You know, we don't need to go crazy, especially since this is a smaller fly. So that's a little bit big. There, that's a little more manageable. Take it, cut it by the hide. Same thing. Hold about halfway. Take and make sure you get the little short bits out. And for me, I'm going to do, actually I'm going to hold a little bit farther up, because these are about 3/4 length fibers, and I want those gone. And then I'm going to take, restack. There we go. Again, not a ton of material, but it'll build up. And for this, I like to go about halfway back the tail. So then I've got kind of a big, and then it tapers down. You can take it all the way back, and then you just have this big kind of cape around it. That's your choice. I like to go about halfway. I think that works really well. It's been very effective for me, so that's my length of choice. So now we got to tie this in underneath. I'm going to take advantage of the rotary. I'm going to flip it up, but you know, you can either flip your hook manually if you want to do it this, or you can just tie it in underneath, all depending. And so again, all my pulls are coming up, and that prevents the material from going too crazy. If it starts moving on, you just do what I did right there. You just kind of bring it back over. There, now my material is in place. So I'm going to go ahead, bring my wraps back, and take advantage of the rotary and just move it over to the side. Not a ton of thread wraps down, because every layer is going to put on more thread, and it's going to end up building up, so we're trying to prevent bulk in the head of our fly. So we're going to go ahead, do the same thing. I'm going to still use the this light orange color. Try to find the right amount. That looks pretty good. Cut it again by the hide. This will start becoming second nature the more flies you tie with bucktail. We always take the shorts out. There's only about 2 or 3 long ones, so I'm just going to actually remove those. I'm not going to worry about stacking those back in. That looks pretty good. Make sure that my length is about the same as my bottom section, coming back about halfway. I got to measure it, hold it, cut it. and tie it on. Again, making sure I don't wrap too hard for those first two, then I pull up, put in a couple wraps, and it should be good. Now as you tie the Deceiver, you're going to start noticing these gaps. Now's the time to come in a little bit in between and just manipulate. Helps if you have a thumbnail. Slightly, not too much, just a little bit. That'll help even that out. So now we're going to tie this other side, and same thing. With these sides, you want to try to get the material to be the same thickness. If you get a little bit uneven, don't worry about it, because again, it'll just make the fly wiggle more. It'll make it a little bit off-center, and that just makes it look more crippled. And so it'll actually fish better. So it's, again, not something that you have to worry about having it perfect. So again, with all bucktail, take the shorts out. That one actually had a few shorts in it. And so I'm taking a look at my long ones. I'm actually going to take out some of those 3/4 length. And I'm going to restack this one. Just eyeballing my taper. Getting it to be about the right length. Cutting. Laying it on. Not being too aggressive. Now once you have the other side on, if you yank this too hard, you will actually spin this whole bundle and you'll twist it around. So then, rather than having the hair flaring out to the side, it'll end up turning it, and now this will be up top. If that happens, just grab it and twist it if you need to. But you know, I was real careful putting it on, so it should be pretty good. And if we've done this pretty good, we should get in a position where we almost have this flat section right across the top. And that's perfect, because now that allows us to put in our dark color, in this case this root beer color, which I happen to like. I don't get too many options to tie with it, but I thought, hey, it's the first day of autumn, so let's have some fun, do some autumn coloration on our fly. And I like my top material to be a little bit heavier as far as how much I put on versus my bottom color. And that's just my preference, but that's too much. Okay. So yeah, that looks to be about the right amount. Alright, so again, we strip off. Let's see here, we're only focusing on this back part. Yeah, my taper looks pretty good. Now I like having my top part a little bit longer than my sides. Not much, just a little bit. And right about there. Yeah, that looks good. So go ahead, we'll measure that. We'll snip it. Now, when I'm cutting this one, I'm actually going to cut it at a slight angle, because I'm trying to reduce the bulk in the head of the fly. So you notice a little bit of an angle. I could cut it flat, and that'd be fine. But when I cut at this angle, and I put the hair down at a slight angle, and that's a little bit too steep. Too shallow, I should say. That's a little better. I want those front fibers to kind of just come down around the eye. So again, light pressure pulling up, successively heavy pressure going forward. And what that should lead is a nice cone on the front. Kind of turn the fly, keep a look around on everything, make sure I'm filling everything in. I got a little bit of some scraggle pieces that came out. I kind of just trim those, and that'll be fine. I can actually show you a trick when we're done with this of how to clean that as well. Okay, so now we're ready for the top part. And for the top part, what we're going to do is we're actually going to do this flash. Now the traditional powder actually has peacock curl over the top. You know, tie your peacock curl on and it comes all the way to the back. And you know what, it looks great. And in the water, it looks really nice. It fishes really well. But I happen to like flash better. And the main reason I like flash, one, variation in color, but two, I have found that it fishes just as well, maybe even better, and more importantly, it's more durable. See, peacock curl is relatively weak, so you get a couple hits with it with some aggressive fish or some short fish, and those strands will start breaking, and the actual life of the fly will be reduced, even though the rest of the bucktail and everything will be fine. So the flash is far more durable, so I prefer to use it. Now I'm going to go with about, let's say about 5 strands. And I'm going to end up doubling this over, so it'll be closer to 10. So good material management with flash especially. Trim up close to our zip tie, and then I can take my flash, take my thread, advance it up close to near the hook eye, and fold my flash around the thread. Again, this is important because when you do that, it'll lock in. You see, bring it right down, and it locks it in. So now as I advance my thread back along the hook, there's no way that this flash is ever going to pull out. It makes the fly very nice and durable. I'm going to go ahead and trim this right now as well. And so what I'm trying to do is be about the same as this crinkle flash off the back. And I come in and I will actually trim at a bit of an angle. I just choose to do that. I think the fly looks better. You see how that kind of drapes down now over the back. I think it's good. So what we're going to do now is continue to work on our head. And we want to be careful not to crowd too much. This one actually has gotten crowded just a bit, and that's okay. Because actually what we're going to do is put on eyes. So I know in the beginning I didn't include that in the material list, and if you were actually watching really closely, you would have noticed a weird jump in this video. And this fly actually looks slightly different, because most of the fly that I tied was actually this fly. And for whatever reason, my video cut off when I was putting in that root beer top. And so you can see this one, you know, it was real nice head. I didn't put any eyes in it. I put in the head cement. Came out really, really nicely. Would have made a nice finish to the video. But I was looking at it and I said, you know what? If I'm going to retie it, let's show you what it looks like with the eyes. And so I'll show you what I did for this fly, and then where I put on the head cement, and then I'll go ahead and I'll put eyes on this one. And when I put eyes on, I'm less concerned about that gradual taper coming all the way back. In fact, I don't mind a little bit of a fat kind of head like this. Okay, so now we're done with the fly, but we need to go ahead and do our whip finish. So we're going to take our whip finish, we're going to bring it down and end up, right, so down on top, bring the thread up, and spin the whip finish this way. And then, see that? It makes a little triangle. And we can place it up against, and we can do our 3 turns. Well, I'll do a 4th. Pull the back end out, pull the thread up, slip the tool out, pull it tight. So now, there we go. I can go ahead and I can cut this. And you know, if I want, my fly could actually be finished. But you know, I want to make this more durable, so I could also put head cement on. Or I can go and really kind of spruce it up and put in eyes. And that's what I'm going to do right now. So I actually have my material, I don't know if you notice, a little bit farther up. So no eyes, a little bit farther back. This one a little bit farther up, and it's a little bit of a hump. And to get that effect more pronounced, because what we want is a flat spot to put our eyes on, I'm going to take these kind of barb crushers. You can use Hackle pliers if you don't have something like these. And just squeeze the thread. And what that does, I'm not squeezing too hard, is it creates a flat spot on both sides. And that gives a really good place for me to put on the eyes. So I'm actually going to use sticky eyes and get it with bodkin. Go ahead, put it in position, kind of get it in place. That's pretty good. Use the back end and use my finger. And you notice now that's all nice and flat. That'll sit really well. And I'm going to do the other side, and this will be very symmetrical. Because again, we don't have a round front, we have kind of a flat cone. So that's a really nice trick, to flatten it. Alright, so we got it with the bodkin. Sticking it on. Kind of getting it in place. Squeeze it in place just a bit. Just to help kind of bend it in place. And so now we'll go ahead and we'll put on our head cement. If you have UV glue, you can actually use the UV and get a really nice kind of fill in and get a really cool head. But if you don't, regular head cement works just fine. There's no need to go out and get the real expensive UV stuff if you don't want to worry about it. If you just want it to be locked in place, regular head cement will do the trick. I get a little bit more head cement than normal, big old glob. And I'm going to kind of like work it on and work it over. And that's going to fill in very nicely right around these eyes. But you notice I'm being really careful. Trying not to get too much into the front of the hook eye itself. Trying not to get too much into the hair. Hopefully I get none at all. And it's just on the thread, just on the eyes itself. And I'll need another little dab. It's always good to have to go back and get more than to have too much. So when you have too much on, it's got nowhere to go. So go ahead, work our way around, get another little dab, put it on the bottom. And I'm actually not being as careful as I usually am. I've gotten a little bit up in that hook eye, and that's okay, because I want to show you what to do in that scenario. So, let me get the last of this on, just filling in those gaps around these little sticky eyes, making sure my material, let me pin that down, doesn't accidentally get stuck, because I don't want to cement the flash in front of the head. Okay. That looks pretty good. That'll lock it in place. But like I said, I've got some, clean my bodkin. Always, always, always clean that every time. Otherwise it'll build up a ton of material in the front and you won't have your bodkins for as long. So what am I going to do? I've got a little bit up here in the front of this hook eye and that's no good. I want to be able to clean that out. Well, if you happen to have feather, it's a really nice way of pulling all of that out without having to worry about using one of those tools to pick it out later on. So I just stick the feather in through the eye, down, and pull it. And all of that excess head cement is now pulled out, and that hook eye is free, with the exception of those little bits of kind of hair. So I want to show you how to clean that up. But first, I need to let this head cement dry. So you'll see the video cut, and once it dries, then I'll show you how to clean that. Okay, so it's dry now. Our eyes are nice and locked in. But like I said before, we still had a little bit of a couple scraggly pieces. It's actually not too bad. It's definitely fishable, but I still want to be able to show you this technique. So I was a little bit sloppy on this one on purpose. So I'm going to use a lighter. And that's why I wanted to wait for my head cement to dry. And all I'm going to do, there's two different ways that we can do this. But with a deceiver, with a bigger pattern, this is the easiest, is just light it a little bit close and just put it right over top. And that will actually do it. And what that does is it singes those hairs and it clears out the eye. The other option that you can do is you can actually use your bodkin. Now this works really, really well for like dry flies and smaller patterns, because you take that up to a dry fly, that's it. Now all of your hackle and everything is ruined. So I'll show you this technique as well. So we go ahead and we're going to heat up our bodkin. Needle point. It's a good way too to make sure that this bodkin stays clean. So now that's really nice and warm, and we can just stick it right into the hook eye. So we do that on top, and we can do it on bottom. I don't need to actually do it on the bottom, but I'll show you again. All I'm doing is just heating this up, and then I'm going to come in, just insert it in the hook eye. And any material that's there is going to clear out. And so now I've got a nice easy way to put my tippet in, to be able to tie my fly onto the end of my leader. And I don't have to worry about, while I'm out on the water, trying to poke anything out or clean it out. I've got a nice clean eye. Always best to make sure this fly is ready to tie on your tippet when you finish it on the bench than trying to do that when you're out on the water, because it's so much easier to do it here. So that's it. Now this is the finished pattern. So this one here is with the eyes. And this one here is our original pattern without the eyes. And again, more of the classic tapered front. Honestly, they both fish just the same. It's personal preference. There are some species of fish that really target eyes, and so having the eyes on the fly can be of benefit, but most of the time it won't make that much of a difference.